One dilemma of the public intellectual is the fact that many of the ideas that they brought forth, once revolutionary and unique, gradually are replaced by even newer, more revolutionary ideas. Those who were once considered rebels against the status quo are now the status quo itself, a victim of their own success. This is evident when we look at someone such as Richard Dawkins, a man best known for his role in the new atheism movement, who has recently come under fire for his stance on gender identity. What was once a celebrated figure of evolutionary theory and infamous antagonist to theology now appears as crotchety and senile, unwilling to adapt to a new world. Who is Richard Dawkins? I'm proud to announce that this video is sponsored by Surfshark. Things are starting to look a lot better, and with that, many of us are slowly returning to study and work in cafes, food courts, libraries, and pretty much anywhere with free public Wi-Fi. However, one thing I've always been worried about is the lack of security that public Wi-Fi offers, giving any hacker free rein to get into your data. Thankfully, there's Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN protects your IP address and uses the same encryption technology as the US government. This guarantees that your personal data will remain for your eyes only, even when using public Wi-Fi. And there's a bonus upside to using this service. Surfshark VPN lets you virtually place your favorite devices anywhere in the world. This allows you to access up to 15 different Netflix libraries. Get Surfshark VPN by entering the promo code Sisyphus for 83% off and 3 extra months entirely for free. Click on the link in the description below. Born in 1941 in the colonial capital city of Kenya, Nairobi, Richard was raised by a distinguished family. His dad was an agricultural civil servant and descendant of a wealthy Oxfordshire family. Richard was a curious child, and fortunately his parents, who were quite interested in the natural sciences, happily answered their son's questions in strict scientific terms. This early education in the sciences likely led to Dawkins' departure from Christianity in his teenage years. As he recalls, the main residual reason why I was religious was from being so impressed with the complexity of life and feeling that it had to have a designer, and I think it was when I realized that Darwinism was a far superior explanation that pulled the rug out from under the argument of design, and that left me with nothing. Dawkins would further entrench his skepticism, diving into Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not Christian, a book that argues against the historical existence of Christ as well as his supposed importance. Dawkins then attended Oxford, where he would study zoology. While there, he was tutored by the Nobel Prize-winning biologist Nicholas Tinbergen, who is best known as one of the founders of ethology, the study of animal behavior. Dawkins soon became his research student, studying the role and nature of decision-making in different organisms. Dawkins received his MA and Doctor of Philosophy degree, and shortly afterwards would attain a teaching position at Berkeley for 3 years. While there, he became committed to the anti-war effort that had swept the campus and would regularly participate in student protests. Afterwards, Dawkins became a lecturer at Oxford and famously published The Selfish Gene in 1976, a book that would become extremely popular and cement Dawkins as a public intellectual. The Selfish Gene argues that all life evolves through the difference in survival of replicating entities, such as genes. Here Dawkins would also introduce his idea of the meme, or cultural gene, an expansion of previous ideas by other thinkers that attempt to analogize culture in terms of Darwinian evolution. Some argued that his book oversimplified the relationship between organisms and genes. In 1998, Dawkins became outspoken against the rise of postmodernism. He supported the Sokal affair, in which a physics professor jokingly submitted an article titled Transgressing the Boundaries Towards a Transformative Hermeneutics of Quantum Gravity, in which he argued that quantum gravity was a social construct, to a postmodernist journal. The journal accepted the article, putting into question the intellectual merit of the field in general. Dawkins would also accuse those such as Guattari and Lacan for using obscure language to hide the fact that their ideas were of little substance. As an extension of his 1986 book, The Blind Watchman, Dawkins would publish The God Delusion in 2006. He would argue that God likely does not exist and that the belief in God is a delusion. Quoting Robert Pirsig, when one person suffers from a delusion, it is called insanity. When many people suffer from a delusion, it is called religion. The book would be met with polarized reception, with some such as Steven Pinker and James Watson supporting the book's message. Others, such as Terry Eagleton, accused Dawkins of failing to truly engage with theological work. Dawkins famously replied, "Do you have to read up on leprechology before disbelieving in leprechauns?" The book would also launch a period in his life of public debates, where he would visit Alabama and debate the mathematician John Lennox. In 2008, Dawkins would retire from his professorial duties and plan to write children's books that would warn kids against believing in anti-science fairy tales. He would re-emerge in the spotlight in 2015, tweeting this. Dawkins would lose his Humanist of the Year title shortly afterwards. Dawkins' thought is comprised of two main areas, his work in evolutionary biology and his advocacy for atheism. Dawkins mainly argues that the gene is the primary unit of natural selection. In The Selfish Gene, he suggests that a gene-centered view of evolution makes perfect sense. As he argues, the more two organisms are genetically similar, the more it would make sense for them to help each other. This in turn would increase the chances of the similar genes being passed on. In this sense, genes are selfish as they improve the survival chances of those that are similar to them. Genes that are naturally selected are ones who benefited from their genetic descendants acting selfishly in terms of striving to be replicated. Some take serious issue with Dawkins' use of the word selfish. Although Dawkins specified that he does not mean that the genes have any sort of volition or motive, but it is simply putting the process into understandable terms, some, such as Andrew Brown, write that there simply isn't an adequate word to describe this process. Selfish, when applied to genes, doesn't mean selfish at all. It means instead an extremely important quality for which there is no good word in the English language, the quality of being copied by a Darwinian selection process. This is a complicated mouthful. There ought to be a better, shorter word, but selfish isn't it. In the extended Phenotype, Dawkins proposed that the effects of genes extend far beyond the organism's physical body, but can also impact the environment and other organisms in such a way as to increase its chances at replicability. He writes, "An animal's behavior tends to maximize the survival of the genes for that behavior, whether or not those genes happen to be in the body of the particular animal performing it." He uses examples such as the malaria virus, which makes infected mosquitoes more attracted to human odor than non-infected mosquitoes, thus increasing its chances at survival and reproduction. In The Selfish Gene, Dawkins would also propose his idea behind mimetics. In the same way that genes act as the self-replication unit of biological evolution, so too do memes act as self-replicating units of cultural evolution. Memes are replicators of a cultural idea or entity and replicate when they encounter another human, if they are found to be culturally relevant or adaptive. However, memes, like genes, can mutate because humans don't always copy memes perfectly or intentionally alter them. This leads to the creation of new memes. This theory behind memes has been criticized in its lack of empirical evidence. The analogy fails to work when we consider that, unlike the process of transcription and translation, there is no code script for them. Some argue that cultural evolution is too chaotic because there is greater instability in the replication mechanism, the human brain. However, a friend of Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, argues that many memes do survive this unstable process, such as age-old music and dance forms. Dawkins would apply his theory of memes to the emergence of world religions, viewing religious belief as a mimetic virus. Those infected have a series of symptoms, such as a deep and uncompromising view of what is right and wrong, that mystery is a good thing, and an intolerant view of rival faiths. Religions tend to not spread because they are found to be true, but rather through cultural transmission, such as through a charismatic leader or parents. The Christian theologian Ulster McGrath notes that many psychological studies show that the majority of religious people tend to actually report greater well-being, and asked Dawkins how it could be considered a virus under such evidence. Dawkins initially launched public criticism against religion in his 1986 The Blind Watchmaker. In it, he argues against the English philosopher William Paley's argument that a watch is too complex to have emerged accidentally. Similarly, nature is too complex to not be designed by an intelligent creator. Dawkins, however, argues that natural selection plays the role of the watchmaker and allows for a functional and complex biological world without the need for divine design. Dawkins has expressed concern for overpopulation, stemming from his criticism of religion. He argues that religious intolerance to contraceptions is the very reason why overpopulation exists. He has also described himself as a feminist. Richard Dawkins was at one point a revolutionary figure in his field, establishing new ways of looking at genetics, evolutionary theory, and how culture works. Regarding his advocacy for atheism, he also emerged at a time in which religious fundamentalism did appear as a threat to human progress and basic security. However, Dawkins has since been cast away as a problematic and archaic figurehead of a movement that has frankly lost its edge. The relevance of Dawkins' commentary on political issues, especially those concerned with gender, is understandably shallow. Nonetheless, Dawkins did pave the way for a dialogue against rigidity to begin with, speaking out against the treatment of gays by religious institutions. He also provided one of the most influential additions to 21st century language, memes. Whether his ideas truly stand the test of time, and whether he decides to tweet the opinion of a man likely far past the age at which he could understand the evolving and nuanced understanding of gender identity, we should nonetheless acknowledge that he too at one point paved the way for progress, and that we too, despite the desire to always be on the right side of history, will also one day fail to understand the complex world around us.